Okay, who are Na Cailleacha? There are 8 women aged 70 or over, although one is barely under 70 still, but everybody else ranges in age from over 70 to 86. They asked me to join them, and they used the word collective. And so I immediately thought, collective? This is serious stuff, you know. It has a future. So we found ourselves constituting a bubble during the epidemic. So although we hadn't even all met each other for the first time until the 1st of September 2020, when we came together then, we spent a month hammering ourselves into some kind of group, and the rest is history. So everybody's very individual and determined to hold on to that, quite rightly. You know, we have this ambition to be some sort of a lobby group for older people, for older women in particular, but not just older women, and for women and ageing and health and creativity. So we had to have some public showing. So Patricia was dying to play with dolls. And people chafed under this, you know, but we agreed to do it because we all love Patricia. So we sat making our dolls, and I thought, this will only work if we make them into some kind of alter egos of ourselves. But it was also about the notion of creativity as play, and how important it is to hold on to a sense of play all through your life. And that is what artists do, and that's what we want artists to do. I'm very interested in the idea that we are supposed to have a second childhood when we get old. So it's a question of embracing some of that, something that might be negative, and turning it creatively into something positive. Just as we chose the name Na Cailleacha, because we're supposed to be old and hags and invisible and full of wrinkles and grey hair and all that kind of stuff. Let's make that our badge, you know, and flaunt it.
At one point, Tomasz, who was photographing me, and I was feeling, because this is the first time I've ever done anything like that, he said, think of the essence that you feel from Paula's picture, the angel. So I put her into my mind, and that shifted everything. So when I look at that, it doesn't feel like me, it feels much more like the essence of something that I found in that picture. I'm never really sure what draws me to something, but I never want to argue with it, because it's almost like, you know, they used to call it the muse, when something lands as a force for an inspiration or a force for work. I don't want to ever argue with that, and that picture really landed. I wanted to sort of feel I could do my version of that. How can I refer to Paula Rego and be true to myself in my own work? So, and I'm a swimmer, so every day I went down for my swim, I collected kelp, which took months and months and months of finding ways to dry it, but trying to get some of the feel of the picture into the kelp.
So now we have Rachel in this exhibition in her seaweed dress at the top of the stairs, and we have the other 7, the dolls representing the other 7 people. So they all represent different aspects of who we were and what memories or something were important for people. So, for instance, Terry's piece is very much about memory. Mine is much more about the politics of feminism. So we felt we didn't have enough work made between us that represented us as a collective. Quite overwhelmed at the thought of this very beautiful space and series of rooms that the dock has, and the staircase. And sadly for all of us, because she is somebody we all admired, Paula Rego died in her 90s, still working very close up to the end of her life as a really strong feminist artist. And in her life, she had touched on all kinds of issues, all the sort of hidden forces, the power that was negatively used against people. We have sensed or experienced all of that to a greater or lesser degree in our lives in Ireland as well. So we thought, here's somebody we want to pay homage to, but who allows us to be free to express ourselves individually. So the Ithaca piece Carole and Barbara had started to make, using Carole's voice and some of Carole's music to imagery that Barbara was very interested in about war in the world. Sadly, it's still happening in the world, so it's relevant still. Then another work in Gallery 1 is a piece of music composed by Carole called The Dance for Paula Rego, and she based it, or it was inspired by a painting called The Dance by Paula Rego. So we installed that with an image from a catalogue of Paula's show at IMA a couple of years ago. And then another piece of work in that room is a piece by Gerda Teljeur, which is a very abstract piece of work, but which we felt fitted well mathematically into the sound rhythms that were going on. So Barbara's history was as a painter and printmaker who engaged with music a great deal, and in about the last 10 years she has switched into digital art. Quite unusual for older people to take to technology like that, but she took to it like a duck to water. So when she was thinking about Paula Rego, she, as we all did, agonised over what is it about Paula Rego's work that most attracts us? And she was very drawn to the fairy tales. But if you look at them, you find very powerful details from Paula Rego's short stories, or fairy tales, I should say, that are then contained in containers that are ancient Greek urns and stuff. So they connect to the Ithaca piece because they go back into that classical history, which Barbara is quite expert. The idea of the studio was actually Patricia's, and we gathered things from all of our studios. And Nick Miller lent us the easel, which we're really thrilled about. So we just added in things from our own homes as well that reverberated a bit with Paula Rego. So various bits of fabric and reject dolls or unfinished dolls, books that we used. Patricia painted the carpet on the floor with the crow because, as Therry has in her painting as well, that motif runs through Paula's work. The one thing I did know was that I wanted to have a really ragged old crow, but I have a very scraggly stuffed crow and a few embroidered clothes that references things that have happened to women, like churching, and it's very insulting to women. Well, Helen's work has always been about mythology and practices. She lives as a theosophist, I think it's fair to say, or an anthroposophist. I mean, it was Helen who came up with the word cailleach to name us. So her goddesses, when she came to make them, were a play on the doll project. She made these incredibly beautiful, really beautifully finished, stitched artworks from cotton over an armature stuffed with hollow fibre. 3 amazing stuffed goddesses, each of whom have several different manifestations. And to complete the circle of goddesses, there is a painting on the wall that Helen had already done, and which actually she borrowed back from the current owners of it, Dr. Morris Fitzgerald and Mrs. Fitzgerald. It's a piece called Venus Rising, and of course Venus has to be there as the great goddess that is also a representation of beauty and allure and sexuality and all of that. I think Gerda's work is very much about meditation. She thinks about every little bit of every line before she applies it. Now, Gerda loves playing with layers and layers superimposed upon layers. That first image over there, called Encroachment, has everything to do, it seems to me, with the landscape and the bog and the earth out of which we have come and to which we will return, and the light on the bog. And that is all suggested just by vertical and horizontal lines. She doesn't deviate from that.
I remember as a 7-year-old when I was dyslexic and my dad was forever trying to find ways of getting me to read. I loved the coloured fairy tales. You know, there were a whole series, R.D. Lang, I think. So I was really interested to see the fairy stories coming into Paula Rego's work, and reminded me of my love of fairy stories, and also probably the beginning of my love of making 3D objects. So I very much went back to making a little world like I did when I was a child. So there are little scenes in there, and they're slightly subverting traditional fairy stories, like Little Red Riding is charming the wolf. She's definitely seducing the wolf. So, oh yeah, there's this little reference to the climate again. There's a little house which is actually a weather house, which has a horsehair coming down from the chimney, which is activated by the moisture in the atmosphere. So if it's going to rain, one figure comes out, and if it's going to be sunny, the other figure comes out. So it's a weather house. The story of the red shoes, the dancing shoes, you know, is about really, it's addiction. It's about addiction. Archetypally, it's about addiction. You put on the red shoes and you can't stop dancing.
So Therry's film is made very much as a gesture to her grandmother, who was terribly important in her life and who lived near the Blue Mountains in Switzerland, where Therry comes from. And she spent a lot of her time wandering through the forest, and they foraged for mushrooms and stuff. Therry was an only girl, so the little girl walking through the forest, who is Therry's granddaughter, is very much like one imagines Therry herself might have been at that age, going out with her wooden doll. And we have the doll here as part of the studio, a studio prop in the show. But she's presented it very beautifully as a moving painting within a picture frame. For us, it's lovely that it's in the same room as Rachel's recreation of a forest as well. So the sound of the forest and the crackling of, you know, twigs underfoot as the child walks through it and takes out her basket. She's like Little Red Riding Hood, isn't she? With her picnic basket and her red rug and so on. It has so many reverberations that were entirely unplanned for with Rachel's work, that in a way it's almost like the epitome of what's happened with the Cailleachs. We start off being about as different as we can be, and we find all kinds of coming together, things happening that we never expected. It's quite beautiful, really.
I would like people to think, wow, older women are still inquisitive, curious, playful, creative, communicate well together, they can put a show together. Something about walking away feeling, oh, maybe it's not going to be so bad getting old, or, you know, I'm older and this is kind of fun, you know. So some sense of a reassurance, you know, that life goes on, and, you know, here we all are, and we're having fun making art. Yeah.